Admiral Kiethavar stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the planet Altaria burn below. The massive windows of the Zephyrian dreadnought Eternal Dominion showed streams of orange fire cutting across the blue-green world like angry scars. His plasma cannons had been firing for 6 hours now, turning cities into glass and mountains into dust. "Status report," Kethvar commanded, his 4 arms crossed behind his back. His purple skin gleamed under the bridge lights, and his black eyes reflected the destruction below. "All major population centers have been neutralized." "Admiral," replied Commander Sixtall from her station, "resistance has dropped to 12%. The remaining Altarian forces are retreating to the polar regions." Kethvar nodded slowly. This was how it always went. For 3,000 years, the Zephyrian hegemony had ruled the galaxy with absolute power. Their technology was superior to every other species they had encountered. Their ships were larger, faster, and deadlier than anything that dared oppose them. Their military doctrine was simple and effective: total destruction of anyone who refused to submit. The Altarians had been foolish to resist. They were a peaceful species, more interested in art and philosophy than warfare. Their ships were beautiful but weak. Their weapons were designed for defense, not conquest. They had sent ambassadors to negotiate, offering tribute and asking only to maintain their cultural independence. Kethvar had listened to their pleas with the same expression he wore now: cold indifference. The hegemony did not negotiate. "It conquered. How many worlds is this now?" Kethvar asked his tactical officer. "Altaria Prime is the 4092nd world to fall under hegemony control, Admiral," came the precise response. 4092 worlds. Each one had thought they were different. Each one had believed their technology, their alliances, or their determination would be enough to stand against the hegemony. All of them had been wrong. Kethvar remembered his first command 2 centuries ago when he was just a young captain. The Corlix Confederation had seemed so mighty then, with their massive fleet and advanced shields. They had fought for 3 years using hit-and-run tactics and guerrilla warfare. In the end, the hegemony had simply built more ships and overwhelmed them with pure numbers. The Corlix were now loyal servants of the Empire, their best warriors serving in auxiliary units. That was the pattern: resistance, war, defeat, integration. Some species adapted quickly and found comfortable places in the hegemony's vast bureaucracy. Others took longer to accept their fate. A few, like the Altarians, chose to fight to the bitter end rather than surrender their independence. Kethvar had stopped feeling sympathy for such species long ago. The galaxy was a harsh place and only the strong survived. The hegemony brought order to chaos, structure to the wild spaces between stars. If that required the occasional extinction of a stubborn species, so be it. "Admiral," called his communications officer, "we're receiving surrender signals from the Altarian government. They're requesting terms." "Standard terms," Kethvar replied without looking away from the burning planet. "Complete submission, full resource extraction rights, and mandatory relocation of the surviving population to designated colonies. No exceptions." The communications officer hesitated. "Sir, they're asking about their historical sites and cultural centers. They want guarantees that—" "Tell them their culture died when they chose to resist," Kethvar cut him off. "They should have thought about preservation before they fired on hegemony vessels." This was the reality of power in the galaxy. The Zephyrians had evolved on a harsh world where only the most ruthless survived. They had learned early that mercy was weakness, that hesitation led to death. When they reached the stars, they brought these lessons with them. Every species they encountered learned the same truth: submit or be destroyed. The bridge fell silent except for the quiet hum of systems and the occasional report from various stations. Kethvar watched as his fighters strafed the last pockets of resistance on the planet's surface. Soon, Altaria would join the thousands of other worlds in the hegemony's empire. Its people would work in the mines and factories. Its resources would feed the war machine, and its children would be taught to serve their Zephyrian masters. "Long-range sensors are detecting movement in the outer system," reported the sensor operator. "Single vessel, unknown configuration." Kethvar turned his attention to the tactical display. A small dot appeared at the edge of the Altarian system, moving steadily toward the inner planets. "Classification? Unknown, sir. The ship doesn't match any known design in our databases. It's small, roughly the size of a heavy cruiser, but the sensor readings are strange." "Strange how?" Kethvar moved closer to the tactical station. I'm having trouble getting clear readings on its hull composition or internal systems. It's almost like it's designed to confuse our scanners. This was unusual. The hegemony had fought every major species in the galaxy over the past 3 millennia. Their databases contained detailed information on millions of ship designs, from the sleek vessels of the Ethereal Collective to the brutal warships of the Crimson Clans. Every known technology had been cataloged, analyzed and countered. Could it be a new Altarian design? Asked Commander Sixtall. The sensor operator shook his head. Negative, Commander. The technology signature is completely different. This is something we've never seen before. Kethvar felt a small stirring of curiosity. It had been decades since anything truly unexpected had happened in his career. The galaxy had become predictable, each conquest following the same pattern. Perhaps this unknown ship would provide some minor entertainment. Open a communication channel, he ordered. Let's see who thinks they can interrupt a hegemony operation. The communications officer worked his controls, then looked up with confusion. I'm transmitting on all standard frequencies, Admiral, but there's no response. The unknown ship continued its steady approach. According to the sensors, it would reach the inner system in approximately 2 hours at its current speed. Kethvar watched its progress with growing interest. Either this was some sort of automated probe or its crew had remarkable discipline. Could it be a diplomatic vessel? Suggested his second-in-command. Some species prefer to approach slowly to avoid being seen as hostile. Kethvar almost smiled at that. Commander, we are currently bombarding a planet into submission. Anyone approaching this system knows exactly what they're flying into. This is not diplomacy. He studied the tactical display more carefully. The unknown vessel was maintaining a perfectly straight course toward Altaria Prime. It wasn't trying to hide or use evasive maneuvers. It wasn't broadcasting any signals or attempting to communicate. It was simply advancing with calm determination. Battle stations, Kethvar ordered quietly. Alarms began to sound throughout the massive dreadnought. Across the bridge, officers moved to their combat positions with practiced efficiency. The ship's weapon systems came online, and additional power flowed to the shields and armor plating. Should we move to intercept, Admiral? Asked the helm officer. Kethvar considered this. Standard doctrine called for engaging unknown vessels at maximum range, but something about this situation felt different. The ship's steady approach, its refusal to communicate, the strange sensor readings. It all suggested that whoever was piloting that vessel had a very specific purpose. Maintain position over Altaria Prime, he decided. If they want to reach us, they can come to us. But prepare the fleet for combat. Something tells me our mysterious visitor isn't here to surrender. As if responding to his words, long-range sensors detected a subtle change in the unknown vessel's energy signature. Whatever weapons or systems it carried were powering up for battle. For the first time in years, Admiral Kethvar felt genuinely curious about what would happen next. The unknown vessel reached the inner system 3 hours later. By then, Admiral Kethvar had positioned his entire battle group in a defensive formation around Altaria Prime. 12 dreadnoughts, 36 cruisers, and over 100 smaller vessels formed a wall of metal and weapons between the planet and the approaching stranger. Still no response to our communication attempts, reported the communications officer. The vessel is ignoring all hails on every known frequency. Kethvar stood at the center of his bridge, watching the tactical display with growing frustration. The unknown ship had maintained its steady course for hours without deviation. It showed no signs of slowing down or changing direction. Most disturbing of all, his sensors still could not penetrate its hull or identify its weapon systems. Range to target? He asked. 200,000 kilometers in closing, Admiral, replied his tactical officer. At current speed, it will reach weapons range in 14 minutes. The ship was definitely smaller than even his lightest cruiser, but Kethvar had learned not to underestimate unknown technology. Throughout the hegemony's history, there had been occasional surprises, species with unexpected weapons or defensive systems that briefly challenged Zephyrian supremacy. The keyword was briefly. Superior numbers and firepower had always won in the end. Charge all weapons, Kethvar commanded. Prepare to fire a warning shot across their bow. If they continue to ignore us after that, we'll destroy them. The massive plasma cannons of his flagship began to glow with contained energy. Across the fleet, similar preparations were taking place. Enough firepower to crack a moon was being aimed at a single small vessel. Target acquired, announced the weapons officer. Ready to fire on your command, Admiral. The unknown ship continued its approach. At this range, Kethvar could see it clearly on the main display. It was sleek and angular, with a dark hull that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. There were no obvious weapon ports or shield generators visible, but that meant nothing. Advanced civilizations often hid their military capabilities behind deceptive exteriors. Fire warning shot, Kethvar ordered. A brilliant stream of plasma erupted from his flagship's main cannon, passing just ahead of the unknown vessel. The energy beam was powerful enough to vaporize a small asteroid. And its message was clear: stop or be destroyed. The ship didn't even slow down. Sir, called the sensor operator, I'm detecting some kind of energy fluctuation around the target vessel. It looks like they're activating defensive systems. Kethvar nodded grimly. Hostile intent confirmed. All ships target the unknown vessel and prepare to fire on my mark. Hundreds of weapon systems across the hegemony fleet turned toward the approaching stranger. The combined firepower was staggering, enough to reduce a small planet to cosmic dust. Whatever species had built this ship, they were about to learn the price of defying the Zephyrian hegemony. Admiral, the communications officer called out suddenly. We're receiving a transmission from the unknown vessel. Audio only, finally. Kethvar straightened his uniform and activated the main speaker. Time to hear the surrender plea of another defeated species. The voice that filled the bridge was unlike anything he had ever heard. It spoke the common galactic tongue, but with strange inflections and an odd accent. Most surprising of all, it was calm and clear, showing no trace of fear. Attention, Zephyrian vessels. This is Captain Sarah Chen of the Terran Expeditionary Force, commanding the starship Indomitable. You are hereby ordered to cease your bombardment of civilian targets and withdraw from Altarian space immediately. Silence fell across the bridge. Kethvar blinked his 4 eyes in confusion. Terran. He had never heard of such a species. His database contained information on every civilization in the known galaxy, but there was no record of any Terrans or their homeworld. More importantly, this Captain Chen was giving him orders. Him, Admiral Kethvar of the Hegemony, conqueror of 1,000 worlds, was being commanded by some unknown alien in a ship barely larger than his personal shuttle. Commander Sixtal, he said quietly, run a search for any species calling themselves Terrans in our database. Already checking. Admiral, she replied, her fingers flying over her console. No matches found. The term Terran appears to be completely unknown. Kethvar activated his own communication system. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of 3 millennia of unquestioned dominance. Unknown vessel, you are trespassing in hegemony space during a lawful military operation. Identify your species and state your homeworld, or you will be destroyed. The response came immediately, and the alien's tone hadn't changed at all. My species is human. Our homeworld is Earth, located in what you probably call the Sol system. We've been watching your lawful military operation for the past 6 hours and we find it unacceptable. Human? Earth? Sol system? None of these terms appeared in any hegemony record. Kethvar felt a growing sense of unease. How could an entire species and their homeworld be completely unknown to them? Sir, whispered his intelligence officer, I'm running deep scans of our historical databases. There are some very old references to a system called Sol in the outer spiral arm, but it was marked as uninhabited. No intelligent life detected. The human captain's voice continued. We represent the Terran Federation, a union of free worlds dedicated to protecting the innocent and stopping bullies like you. Your attack on these peaceful people ends now. Kethvar felt his temper rising. No one had spoken to him like this in over 2 centuries. Captain Chen, you are outnumbered 300 to 1. Your ship is alone against my entire battle group. I suggest you reconsider your position before I demonstrate the consequences of defying the hegemony. There was a brief pause, then something that chilled Kethvar to his core. The sound of laughter. This human was actually laughing at him. Admiral, I think you're the one who needs to reconsider. You see, we humans have a saying. It's not the size of the dog in the fight, it's the size of the fight in the dog. And right now you're picking a fight with the wrong dog. On the tactical display, the Terran vessel was still approaching. It had not deviated from its course despite being targeted by hundreds of weapons. Either its captain was insane, or the ship possessed capabilities far beyond what its size suggested. Captain Chen, Kethvar tried once more. I don't know what remote corner of the galaxy you crawled out of, but you are interfering with a hegemony operation. The Altarians chose to resist our authority. They are being punished according to our laws. This does not concern you. The response was immediate and sharp. When innocent people are being murdered, it concerns us. When bullies attack those who can't defend themselves, it concerns us. When an empire thinks it can do whatever it wants just because it's big and strong, it definitely concerns us. Kethvar looked around his bridge. His officers were staring at the tactical display with expressions ranging from confusion to disbelief. In their entire careers, none of them had encountered a situation like this. A single small vessel, crewed by an unknown species, was not only refusing to retreat but actively challenging the might of the hegemony. "Sir," called the tactical officer, "the Terran vessel is now within weapons range." "What are your orders?" Kethvar studied the display one more time. The ship called Indomitable continued its steady approach. Its energy signature was unlike anything in their databases, and his sensors still could not determine its true capabilities. But none of that mattered. He commanded the largest fleet ever assembled in this sector of space. No single ship, regardless of its technology, could stand against such overwhelming force. "Captain Chen," he broadcast one final time, "you have 10 seconds to reverse course and leave the system. If you do not comply, I will consider your vessel hostile and respond accordingly." The human's voice came back without hesitation. "Admiral, we've traveled a very long way to get here. We didn't come all this distance just to turn around and leave. If you want us gone, you'll have to remove us yourself." Kethvar smiled coldly. Throughout galactic history, many species had made similar boasts. All of them had learned the same harsh lesson about the price of arrogance. "So be it," he said, and turned to his weapons officer. "All ships lock weapons on target. Prepare to fire." Before Admiral Kethvar could give the order to fire, Captain Chen's voice filled the bridge again. This time her tone had changed from defiant to educational, as if she were explaining something to a curious child. "Admiral, before we begin this fight, I think you should understand exactly who you're dealing with. You seem confused about humans and where we come from, so let me tell you a story." Kethvar hesitated, his finger hovering over the firing control. Something in the human's voice made him pause. It wasn't fear or desperation, it was confidence. Complete, unshakable confidence. "My species evolved on a world called Earth," Chen continued. "It's a beautiful planet, mostly covered in water with great continents and diverse climates. But Earth is also a very dangerous place. Our homeworld has tried to kill us in every way imaginable." On the bridge, the Zephyrian officers exchanged glances. Why was this alien giving them a biology lesson in the middle of a confrontation? "We survived ice ages that lasted for thousands of years," Chen went on. "We endured plagues that killed half our population. We lived through volcanic eruptions that blocked out the sun for decades. Our planet threw everything it had at us. Storms, earthquakes, floods, droughts, predators that could tear us apart with their claws and teeth." Kethvar found himself listening despite his irritation. Most species he encountered had evolved on relatively stable worlds. The Zephyrians themselves came from a harsh planet, but it was harsh in predictable ways. This Earth sounded like chaos. "But the most dangerous thing on our world wasn't the climate or the animals," Chen continued. "It was us. Humans have been fighting each other for our entire history. We created weapons that could level cities. We fought wars that lasted for decades. We built empires and watched them fall. We learned to kill each other in ways that would horrify most civilized species." "Get to the point," Kethvar growled into his communicator. "The point, Admiral, is that we didn't just survive all of this. We thrived. Every disaster made us stronger. Every war taught us new lessons. Every challenge forced us to become better, faster, smarter, and more determined. By the time we reached the stars, we had already faced the worst the universe could throw at us." On the tactical display, the Terran vessel had stopped its approach. It hung in space between the Hegemony Fleet and Altaria Prime, a tiny speck of metal and ceramic against the vast darkness. "We also learned something else," Chen said, her voice growing softer. "We learned the difference between strength and cruelty, between victory and domination, between protecting what you love and destroying what you fear." She paused for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a weight that made every officer on the bridge listen. "Admiral, Your species builds big ships and powerful weapons. You conquer planets and subjugate entire civilizations. You think that makes you strong. But you know what I see when I look at your fleet? I see bullies. I see creatures so afraid of losing control that you destroy anything that might challenge you. Kethavar's anger flared. You dare lecture me about strength? You command a single vessel against my entire battle group. Yes, I do, Chen replied calmly. And do you know why? Because humans don't measure strength by how many ships we have or how many worlds we control. We measure it by what we're willing to do for others, by what we're willing to sacrifice to protect the innocent. At that moment, something new appeared on the hegemony sensors. Escape pods and transport ships were rising from Altaria Prime's surface, carrying civilian refugees away from the bombardment zones. They were small defenseless vessels filled with families and children. You see those ships? Chen asked, as if she could see the same display. Those are people trying to survive. Mothers and fathers trying to save their children. They're not soldiers or rebels, they're just ordinary beings who want to live in peace. The refugee ships were moving slowly, overloaded with passengers and limited by their basic engines. They would be easy targets for the hegemony fleet. And you know what, Admiral? That single Terran vessel you're so eager to destroy? It's going to make sure every one of those civilian ships reaches safety. Because that's what humans do. We stand between the innocent and those who would harm them. On the tactical display, the Indomitable began to move. But instead of attacking the hegemony fleet or retreating to safety, it positioned itself directly between the refugee ships and Kethavar's weapons. The small Terran vessel was using itself as a shield. You're insane, Kethavar breathed. You're protecting ships that aren't even your own species. That's right, Chen confirmed. We call it doing the right thing. I know that might be a foreign concept to you. Kethavar stared at the display in disbelief. Throughout his career, he had encountered many different species with various motivations. Some fought for resources, others for territory or revenge. A few battled for religious reasons or ancient grudges, but he had never met anyone willing to sacrifice themselves for complete strangers. Sir, his tactical officer whispered, the Terran vessel is in a perfect position. One concentrated barrage from the fleet will destroy it and most of the refugee ships behind it. The Admiral nodded slowly. This was the logical tactical solution. Eliminate the threat and the civilians in one efficient strike. It would demonstrate to any other potential troublemakers what happened to those who interfered with hegemony operations. But something nagged at him. This human captain, this Sarah Chen, had spoken about her species' history with such casual confidence. She described wars and disasters that would have destroyed most civilizations. Yet her people had not only survived but grown stronger. What kind of beings had the galaxy produced in that distant system called Sol? Captain Chen, he called over the communicator. You're going to die for strangers. Your sacrifice won't change anything. I'll destroy you and the refugee ships and then I'll finish bombarding the planet. Your intervention is meaningless. The response came immediately. Maybe. But here's what you don't understand about humans, Admiral. We don't help people because we think it will change the universe. We help them because it changes us. Because every life we save makes us more than what we were. Because someone has to stand up to bullies even if the odds are impossible. Chen paused, and when she continued, there was something almost sad in her voice. Your species has been conquering the galaxy for 3,000 years. You've faced no real challenges, no true opposition. You've grown comfortable in your dominance. But comfort makes you weak, Admiral. You've forgotten what real strength looks like. Kethavar felt a chill run down his spine. There was something in the human's tone that suggested she knew things he didn't. As if this confrontation was part of some larger plan. What are you really? He asked quietly. Captain Chen's laugh was soft but somehow terrifying. We're what happens when evolution doesn't just create survivors, Admiral. We're what happens when it creates guardians. And right now you're threatening people under our protection. On the sensor display, the Indomitable's energy signature began to change. Systems that had been hidden from Zephyrian scanners were coming online, revealing technology that matched nothing in their databases. Last chance, Admiral, Chen said, her voice hardening. Order your fleet to withdraw and allow the civilian evacuation to continue. Do that, and we can settle this between soldiers without involving innocents. Kethavar looked around his bridge at the faces of his officers. They were waiting for his command, ready to follow orders without question. 300 ships against one. The mathematics were clear. But for the first time in his long career, Admiral Kethavar was not entirely confident in the outcome. Admiral Kethvar's patience finally snapped. 3,000 years of hegemony dominance would not be challenged by a single unknown vessel, regardless of its captain's confident words. "All ships," he commanded, his voice echoing across the battle group's communication network. "Concentrate fire on the Terran vessel. Full bombardment. Reduce it to atoms." The response was immediate and devastating. 300 Zephyrian warships opened fire simultaneously. Plasma beams, antimatter torpedoes, gravity bombs, and particle accelerators unleashed their fury on the small space between the hegemony fleet and the civilian evacuation ships. The energy release was so intense that the bridge's main screen automatically darkened to protect the crew's vision. Space itself seemed to burn as weapon after weapon struck the area where the Indomitable had positioned itself. The bombardment continued for 30 seconds, long enough to destroy a small moon. When the weapons fell silent, a cloud of superheated gas and debris filled the space where the Terran vessel had been. Kethvar smiled with satisfaction. Whatever advanced technology the humans possessed, it could not stand against the concentrated firepower of an entire battle group. "Sensor sweep," he ordered. "Confirm destruction of the target." The sensor operator worked his controls, then looked up with confusion. "Sir, I'm detecting something in the debris cloud." There's still a solid mass approximately the size of the original vessel. The main screen cleared as the gas and particles dispersed. What they saw made every officer on the bridge gasp in shock. The Indomitable hung in space exactly where it had been before the bombardment. Its dark hull showed no signs of damage. No scorch marks, no missing sections, no indication that it had just absorbed enough firepower to level a continent. "Impossible," whispered Commander Sixtal. Captain Chen's voice came through the communicators, still perfectly calm. "That was very impressive, Admiral. Your fleet has considerable firepower. Unfortunately for you, we've spent the last 2 centuries preparing for exactly this kind of fight." On the tactical display, the Terran vessel's energy signature was changing again. Hull plates were sliding apart to reveal internal systems that had been hidden from sensors. What emerged was technology unlike anything in Zephyrian databases. "You see," Chen continued, "humans learned a long time ago that the best defense isn't avoiding a fight. It's being able to take everything your enemy can dish out and still be standing when the smoke clears." The Indomitable's hull was transforming. Armor plating that had appeared solid and static was actually composed of thousands of smaller sections that could move independently. As Kethvar watched, these sections rearranged themselves, creating new configurations and revealing weapon systems that defied conventional design. "We call it adaptive armor," Chen explained. "Every shot you fire teaches our systems how to better resist the next one. Your plasma beams were quite effective at first, but our hull has already adjusted its molecular structure to dissipate that type of energy." Kethvar stared at the display in disbelief. The human ship was not just defending itself, it was learning from their attacks and becoming stronger. "Sir," called his weapons officer, "I'm detecting massive energy buildups throughout the Terran vessel. They're charging weapons of unknown type." Chen's voice took on a different quality, becoming harder and more focused. "Our turn." What happened next would be talked about in military academies for generations to come. Assuming anyone survived to tell the story, the Indomitable attacked, but it didn't attack the way any known species fought. There were no massive energy beams or clouds of missiles. Instead, the human ship fired weapons that seemed to bend the laws of physics themselves. Kinetic accelerators launched projectiles at significant fractions of light speed. These weren't explosive warheads or energy bursts. They were simple chunks of ultra-dense metal moving fast enough to punch through shields and armor like they weren't there. The first volley struck 3 Zephyrian cruisers, and they simply ceased to exist. The kinetic energy was so enormous that the ships were converted to expanding clouds of plasma. Next came fusion missiles that detonated in controlled nuclear explosions. But these weren't the crude fusion weapons that most species used. These created miniature suns that burned with precisely calculated temperatures and radiation spectrums. Shields designed to stop energy weapons found themselves overwhelmed by reactions that mimicked stellar cores. The third wave of attacks defied everything Kethvar thought he knew about warfare. Beams of twisted spacetime erupted from the human vessel, creating localized gravitational anomalies that crushed ships like empty cans. Reality itself seemed to bend and warp around these quantum disruptors. "Evasive maneuvers," Kethvar shouted, but his massive dreadnoughts were too large and slow to avoid weapons that traveled at the speed of light. The Eternal Dominion shuddered as kinetic rounds punched through its armor. Fusion missiles detonated against its shields, overwhelming the protective barriers with raw stellar fury. Warning alarms screamed throughout the bridge as system after system reported critical damage. "How is this possible?" Commander Sixtel cried out, clinging to her console as the ship bucked under repeated impacts. Captain Chen's voice came through the chaos, still perfectly composed. 3 centuries ago, my ancestors fought a war that nearly destroyed our homeworld. We swore it would never happen again. Since then, we've spent every day preparing for the worst possible threats the universe could throw at us. Another volley from the Indomitable struck the hegemony line. A dreadnought broke apart under kinetic bombardment, its hull fracturing like glass. 2 heavy cruisers vanished in fusion fire. The neat formation of the Zephyrian fleet was dissolving into chaos as ships desperately tried to escape the human weapons. "We studied every form of warfare," Chen continued. "We analyzed every possible technology. We prepared for enemies who might be bigger, stronger, or more advanced than us. And we learned the most important lesson of all. The Eternal Dominion's shields failed. Kinetic rounds hammered into the hull, tearing through armor plates like tissue paper. Secondary explosions rippled through the massive vessel as internal systems overloaded." "What lesson?" Kethavar gasped, more to himself than to the human captain, but Chen heard him anyway. "That it doesn't matter how big your ships are or how many weapons you have. What matters is how much you're willing to sacrifice for what you believe in." The human ship was moving now, dancing between the desperate return fire of the hegemony fleet. Its weapons spoke with mathematical precision, each shot calculated to cause maximum damage while avoiding unnecessary destruction. This wasn't the random fury of a berserker. It was the controlled violence of a surgeon. "Sir," reported the communications officer, "we're receiving surrender signals from 12 vessels. The cruiser squadron on our left flank is requesting permission to withdraw." Cathvar looked at his tactical display with growing horror. In less than 10 minutes, a single enemy vessel had reduced his mighty battle group to a collection of burning wrecks and fleeing survivors. Ships that had conquered 1,000 worlds were running like frightened animals. The Indomitable's weapons fell silent. In the sudden quiet, Captain Chen's voice filled the bridge one more time. "Admiral, you've just learned what happens when bullies meet someone who won't back down. Your choice now is simple. Order your remaining ships to withdraw and never return to this system or watch them all burn." Kethavar stared at the tactical display. Half his fleet was gone. The other half was badly damaged and demoralized, and the human ship that had done all this damage was still completely intact. For the first time in 3,000 years, the Zephyrian hegemony had met its match. Admiral Kethavar stood in the ruins of his bridge, staring at the tactical display that showed the remains of what had once been the most powerful fleet in the galaxy. Emergency lighting cast red shadows across the faces of his surviving crew. Half his ships were gone, reduced to expanding clouds of debris. The other half were crippled and burning, and through it all, the human vessel Indomitable remained untouched. "Sir," whispered his communications officer, "the surviving ships are requesting orders." Kethavar said nothing. For 3,000 years, the hegemony had ruled through superior firepower and unquestioned dominance. No enemy had ever stood against them and survived. No single vessel had ever defeated an entire battle group. The mathematical impossibility of what had just occurred left him speechless. Captain Chen's voice cut through the silence. "Admiral, this is your last warning. Order your ships to withdraw or I will finish what you started." The threat was not empty. Kethavar had seen what human weapons could do. If this Captain Chen wanted to destroy his remaining forces, she could do so easily. The fact that she was offering him a choice rather than simply annihilating his fleet spoke to something he didn't understand. Mercy from a position of absolute strength. "Why?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "You could destroy us all. Why give us the chance to escape?" There was a pause before Chen answered. "Because, Admiral, we're not like you. We don't kill unless we have to." Those were warships that fired at us. Legitimate military targets. But your surviving crews aren't a threat to anyone right now. They're just soldiers following orders. Kethavar looked around his bridge. His officers were staring at him, waiting for guidance. These were beings who had served the hegemony faithfully for decades, who had believed in the absolute superiority of their civilization. What could he tell them now? "All ships," he said finally, his voice carrying across the fleet communication network. "This is Admiral Kethvar. We are withdrawing from Altarian space immediately. Set course for the nearest hegemony base and prepare for emergency hyperspace jump." The response was swift. His remaining vessels, grateful to escape with their lives, began powering up their hyperspace engines. Within minutes, the scattered remnants of the once mighty battle group vanished into the void between stars. But even as his ship prepared to jump, Kethvar remained on the bridge, staring at the human vessel. "Captain Chen, this isn't over. The hegemony has thousands of ships, millions of soldiers. You've won one battle, but you cannot stand against our entire empire." Chen's response was calm but filled with certainty. "Admiral, let me tell you something about humans that your intelligence services obviously missed. We don't just fight battles. We fight wars, and we don't fight them alone." As if responding to her words, space around the Altarian system began to shimmer. New contacts appeared on sensors, dozens of them, then hundreds. Sleek vessels with the same dark hulls and impossible technology as the Indomitable were dropping out of hyperspace throughout the system. "You see," Chen continued, "the ship you just fought wasn't our entire force. It was a single vessel from our expeditionary fleet. While you were bombarding innocent civilians, we were preparing to introduce your empire to the concept of consequences." Kethvar watched in growing horror as more and more human ships appeared. Unlike Zephyrian vessels, these were not built for intimidation through size. They were lean, functional, and deadly. Each one radiated the same confident energy signature as the Indomitable. "How many?" he whispered. "This is just the advance force," Chen replied. "Admiral, your empire has been conquering and enslaving species for 3 millennia. Do you really think no one noticed? Do you think no one cared?" The communication system crackled, and suddenly multiple voices filled the bridge. They spoke in different languages with different accents, but they all carried the same message. "This is Captain Rodriguez of the TSS Defiant. We stand with our Altarian allies, Commander Singh of the Vindicator, reporting for duty. The hegemony ends here. Captain O'Brien aboard the Relentless, ready to show these bullies what real warriors look like." Voice after voice joined the chorus. Human captains from across the Terran Federation, each commanding vessels that could apparently match or exceed Zephyrian technology. But there was something else in their words that chilled Kethvar to the bone. They weren't just confident, they were eager for the fight. "You wanted to know what humans are?" Chen asked. "We're the species that looked at a galaxy full of bullies and said enough. We're the ones who decided that might doesn't make right, that the strong have an obligation to protect the weak." The hyperspace engines of Kethvar's flagship reached full charge. In seconds, he would be safely away from this nightmare. But before he jumped, he had to ask one more question. "What do you want from us?" Captain Chen's answer was simple and terrifying in its implications. "We want you to stop. No more conquest. No more enslaving peaceful species. No more burning worlds because they refuse to submit. The age of hegemony dominance is over. And if we refuse..." The pause that followed was filled with promise and threat in equal measure. "Then we'll do what we've always done, Admiral. We'll stand between the innocent and those who would harm them. And we'll keep standing until either we fall or you learn to behave like civilized beings." As the Eternal Dominion prepared to jump to hyperspace, Kethvar's sensors detected something that made his blood freeze. The human fleet wasn't staying in the Altarian system. They were spreading out, moving toward different hyperspace, routes that led deep into hegemony territory. "This is Captain Chen, broadcasting on all frequencies to every world in Zephyrian space," came the voice that would haunt his dreams. "This is Terra calling. You are not alone. We have heard your cries for freedom and we are coming." The hyperspace jump engaged and Admiral Kethvar's ship vanished from the system. But even as he fled toward the hegemony capital to deliver his impossible report, he knew that everything had changed. For 3,000 years, his species had ruled through fear and superior technology. They had believed themselves invincible, the ultimate apex predators of the galaxy. Now they had learned the truth. Somewhere in the darkness between stars, evolution had been working on a different kind of apex predator, one that fought not for conquest or domination but for justice, one that measured strength not by what it could destroy, but by what it could protect. The Zephyrian hegemony's reign of terror was ending. The age of humanity had begun. As news of the defeat spread across the galaxy, something stirred on 1,000 enslaved worlds. In the factories and mines where conquered species toiled under hegemony rule, workers looked up at the stars with new hope. On worlds where resistance movements had hidden in shadows for generations, rebels began to emerge into the light. The strongest empire in galactic history was about to learn what happened when 3 billion years of evolution produced not just survivors, but guardians. And every tyrant, dictator, and bully in the galaxy was about to discover that there was a new power among the stars, one that would never stop fighting for those who could not fight for themselves. The battlefield had trembled. When the human battleship appeared, soon the entire galaxy would shake as Terra's children came home to set the captives free.